Alright, welcome back for another one of our little Zbrush videos on demand here. Once again, I am Tyler Evangelista. Alright, so what we're going to talk about in this little installment here, just another quick, as I said, about 10 to 20 minutes on all this stuff. We're going to talk about some saving, or three ways of saving inside of Zbrush here. We'll talk about camera, rotation, a couple of our primitives, and then talk about some brush settings here as well. We'll see what we can get through in this amount of time here. So let's go ahead and minimize that down here and jump into ZBrush. Okay, it looks like we got a couple weird things happening here. Let's go ahead and close down our draw tool. I don't know, sometime in between here I accidentally got that in there, it looks like. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk a little bit about saving in here. So I'm gonna sort of do the same thing we did before. Let's load in a Z tool. Let's go ahead and let's grab this demo head right here. We'll go ahead and open that up and drag it into my scene. Now I want to be able to edit this one right here. So once again, we need to come up and hit edit, or you guys are going to want to remember that T key. That T key, it's something you're going to be hitting all the time here. A T key to bring yourself into edit mode. Now, depending on what you start with, hitting that edit tool might be enough to get you into the point where you can start to, let me turn off that symmetry, because we haven't talked about that yet, but it may be enough to get you to the point where you can start to sculpt on some of this stuff. But it really depends on what it is you're dealing with here. Now, if I'm loading in a Z tool, remember these tools, it's going to be a file or a poly object that we're saving out under this specific file type, being this ZBrush tool file. Now those tool files, ZBrush knows that it's a tool and that you want to sculpt on it. It's already going to be 3D. But we do have a whole set of primitives that we can bring in here as well. So let's say I didn't want to use this this demo head that comes in here. I'll go ahead and clear out my document, and I'm going to click on this to bring open my primitives, or in other words, some of the tools that I can bring in by default. So we see a little bit of a history right here, being our quick pick. So under our quick pick, we've got usually these first three are always going to be here, and then we're going to see things that we brought in previously. So our last lesson, we brought in that dog. It's going to be there, and we've got this sphere and a little bit of an edited sphere from earlier, and of course that demo head that we had from previously there. Now we've also got some 2.5D brushes, that 2.5D, and you know, I'm really not going to touch with any of this. We're not going to deal with any of this stuff here. At one point, we may grab this MRGBZ grabber right here, because we can actually create some kind of cool tiling textures out of models. So we'll probably see that, but other than that, I'm not really thinking that we're going to spend much time talking about really anything else here. But we do have these primitives that we can start off with here. Just like if you're familiar with Mudbox, we've got the human base mesh, we've got the human head, we've got that T-Rex, and so on and so forth. We've got some starter options here as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab something like this Sphere 3D right here. So let's go ahead and click on that. Now remember that it is not going to just open it up. I'm not opening up something. I am selecting a tool that I want to draw into my scene. So we'll go ahead and just left click, drag out here, and you may be wondering, well, how big should I make this? The size that you make this is completely arbitrary. It doesn't matter. Okay, so just drag it out to whatever size. Now if I want to be able to edit this, remember we need to come over here, click edit. Okay, but what's going to happen in this case, because this is not a ZTL file, I have to go a little bit farther. You can see if I try to sculpt on this, it's telling me that I need to enable sculpting. So I need to convert this 3D primitive to a polymesh 3D. And really all we have to do with that, it's quite simple. Right up here in your tool palette, we're just going to click on make polymesh 3D. Okay, and now at this point, I can now come in here and start to sculpt on this. So I'm just going to actually make this a little bit asymmetrical so we can kind of tell for this next piece kind of what's going on there. Alright, there we go. Okay, so one of the first things we really need to discuss is saving out our projects. And it's not quite, and what you're going to find is there's not a lot of things that are just straightforward here in this program. But once we get used to them, they're very easy to deal with here. So we've got really three ways that we can save something inside of ZBrush. Okay, so the first one is actually to save out a ZTL file or a ZBrush tool. And just like we have load tool here, I've got a save as. Now if I save here, I'm going to be saving a ZTL file. And we need to be aware that only one thing is going to get saved. This object right here. It's not going to remember anything else. Okay, so if I've made any changes in here, if I've got subtools, other things, other meshes in here, it's not going to save those out. If I've started to customize anything inside of ZBrush here, it's not going to save that as well. It's basically like when we're in Maya, we take an object and we export it. We're basically exporting that object out as a file format that ZBrush understands. So if the only thing I care about is that object and the sculpting I've done to it, I can save it out as a Z tool and easily bring it back into a new project. Now I can also come to document here and I can save a document. Now if I save a document, I am not saving any 3D information. It's basically like I'm taking a snapshot of what I have in here. I am saving a 2D image. A document, everything in this document we're dealing with sort of 2D images for the most part. Alright, so if I save a document, I'm saving a picture. I'm not saving anything that I can come in here and start to sculpt on. Right, so really what we want to do, and you know, both of those are going to be very small file types, both the ZTL and the document file. Those are going to be nice small file types, but that's not going to really have everything I want. So almost always what we're going to need to do when we save is we want to come here to File. I want to come to File and Save As. And what this is going to do is save a ZPR, which is a ZBrush project file. And that ZBrush project file, while it is going to be a larger file, is going to have everything in here. And this is where we want to save. This is how we're going to be saving 99% of the time, unless you're just trying to get a Z tool out for the most part. So, File and Save As is what we're going to want to come to. Okay, so that's my saving. Let's move on here and talk about some camera controls here, because we need to be able to move around in this area. Now, these camera controls are a little bit foreign for most people coming from a 3D application. Okay, we're used to Alt, left, middle, and right mouse button as how we're going to navigate in through this. And while I am using a mouse right now, I almost never use a mouse inside of ZBrush. Later on, I'm going to be using a tablet. And one of the first deterrents I personally had for ZBrush was its camera movements. It felt weird to me. And I think it felt weird to me because I was using a mouse when I first tried to learn it. Okay, the tablet, it makes sense. The mouse, you know, not so much here. Okay, so how we're going to control our camera here is I'm going to left click, and of course if I was using a tablet, it would basically just be pushing down on my tablet anywhere with my pen. Okay, so left click and drag is going to allow me to rotate my object here. Okay. Now one thing we need to be aware of is that I can only rotate when my brush, and we can see my brush right here, this series of 2 red rings. Okay, that's my brush. I can only rotate when I am off of my mesh. If I am on my mesh, I am going to be sculpting. So then, well, what happens if I'm zoomed in here really close and it's filling in my entire area here? All I can do is click. How am I supposed to rotate? Well, if you remember what I was talking about last time, is that we have our canvas being this area here, and then along this little border we see right there, that is my canvas background. And if I come into my canvas background, it's not an area that we consider an area that we can work on. Okay, so I can actually click over there and rotate. And what you're going to see is sort of where you click is where you're going to create a pivot point for that rotation. So if I rotate down here, it's sort of making a pivot point down in this area. Okay, if I come up here, I'm going to get a different rotation, and you can see that happening there. Another really nice feature, something that's going to make your life a whole lot easier, is the F key. So we're going to tap F as in frame, and it's going to frame everything up in my scene here. Okay. Now, another thing we need to be aware of in terms of our rotation here is sort of snapping to views. So what we can do is, if I want to look at this completely from the front, I can snap to the front, or I can snap to the side, or the top, snap to that view here. All right, and the way we're going to do that is while rotating, I'm going to hold Shift, and it allows me to snap. All right, now another little rotating trick here is if I hold Shift, left click, and let go of Shift, I now have a rotation like this. It's, I guess you would call it a pitch or a yaw, or a tumble. Actually, I think a tumble is probably the most appropriate. So you can get a tumble here if things are oriented a little differently than you would like. So for instance, just to kind of show this off here, let's say we had back to this guy's head right here. We'll draw that out, and we'll hit Edit. Okay, so what can happen sometimes while we're rotating is that things can kind of start to get a little upside down here. So I can start to rotate, press Shift to snap, okay, and snap that. I'll start the rotate, and then press Shift to get that snap to happen. But it may be upside down, so I can hold down Shift, click with my left mouse button, let go of Shift, and now come in here and rotate that around. All right, and then I can reposition that where I want. Okay, so that snapping is going to be very helpful. Kind of see this happening. And the way I'm going to be snapping that is I'm going to start the rotation and then press Shift. Then let go of my mouse and then let go of Shift. It can be a little bit, it takes a little bit. Right, now if I started rotate snapped and then let go of Shift first, it's not going to snap, okay? You have to let go of your left mouse button or bring your pen up off the tablet first and then let go of Shift. And it's going to keep that happening there, okay? So that's my rotation. Okay, both just free rotating, snapping, and being able to tumble. All right. And you can see kind of even using a mouse, which I'm not very used to, Zbrush with a mouse, it's still quite easy to get all this stuff to happen, to be able to snap this stuff around. So it just takes a little bit of practice. It's going to feel a little goofy to start off with. Now, the other bits we have here, let's talk about tracking the camera here. So this is where things start to get a little bit weirder. In fact, tracking is actually pretty normal. We're going to hold down Alt, left mouse button, and drag. Okay. Now, once again, remember to let go of your mouse or lift your pen off the tablet before you let go of Alt, just like with Shift. Okay, because if I am tracking here, so for instance, if I start tracking and I let go of Alt first, it's going to kind of move my object around a little bit. Okay, now if I track, let go of my mouse button first, and then Alt, it's going to stay where it should. Something to be aware of. All right, now the goofy bit here, the real goofy bit, if you didn't think any of that other stuff was goofy, is the actual zooming in and out, or I guess you would call it a pan or a dolly, because zooming, to be technical about it, zooming actually changes your aspect ratio, and that's not going to happen here. All right, so here's how we're going to do this. We're going to hold down Alt and left mouse button, which is, as we know, how we're going to translate our object here. And I'm going to let go of Alt and drag my mouse. Okay, so if I'm holding Alt and my left mouse button at the same time, I track, but when I let go of Alt and I still have my left mouse button clicked in, or I still have my pen down on my tablet, dragging now is going to allow me to track in and out. And it's not that bad, okay? You click down with your left mouse button, and if you tap, and if you really just, I'm sorry, let's say that a little better. If you press Alt, click, let go of Alt, it's that easy. Now, why do I actually like this camera movement, and it took me a while to realize why I like it. And the reason is that I don't have to use any of the buttons on my pen for my tablet. Now, if you've never used a tablet before, it looks like a regular pen that kind of has two little buttons on the side of it. And while it's not a big pain to use those, I never have to use those with this type of camera movement. Inside of Zbrush, or Mudbox rather, excuse me, you do have to utilize those. So that's going to be my camera controls here. Alt and left mouse button to track, just out here on the canvas to rotate. Remember, Shift is going to be my snapping. Okay, and then Alt, let go of Alt, of course with my left mouse button down to zoom in and out here. Alright, and that's my basic movements. Check to see how I'm doing on time on this one, because I want to make sure that we don't go too long on this one. So, give me 1 second here. I'm going to pause the recording, and I will be right back. Okay, it looks like we're back here, and we're about 15 minutes. So before I kind of move into our brush size and strength and z-add and z-subtract and focal shift and all that, I'm going to save that for a separate lesson here. So we just really talked about saving and camera controls on this one. So I'm going to go ahead and let's end it off there. Let me go ahead and open that up, or in fact I could use my hotkeys, but let's end it off there, and we'll be back ever so shortly for another installment.